So we're now moving on to a topic that has come up in several of the discussions, which is around how to finance these projects. And a lot of innovation has been made in this important area, and we're seeing the PPAs are getting shorter in terms of the length, which is incredibly helpful. So we're going to start this session with a presentation on facilitating financing for mining hybrids in developing countries. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mamadou Barry. Mamadou is a senior mining specialist with the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I knew that speaking right after lunch is always a challenge, so this is not an exception. But I would like to thank Adrian and her organizing committee for inviting the World Bank to address the issue of the challenge of financing mining hybrid. My discussion will focus on developing countries. The reason for developing countries is that's where the biggest opportunities are, but that's where also the largest challenges are. I'm not going to dwell too much on the challenges because they've been presented earlier by my colleague from Colombia. And so I will just make sure that some of the challenges that we're facing is the challenges you already know, but the challenges also that are multiplied in the case of a developing country, particularly when you're looking at a developing market. The World Bank is the largest organization involved in economic development financing. And so we do so by working with governments, working with the private sector, but working also with civil society and other stakeholders to make projects feasible in the environments that are the riskiest imaginable in the world. And so the World Bank has three institutions. One is IFC. My colleague from IFC are here, and they will be talking to you about opportunities where they can help in some of your projects. We have also the IBRD and IDA. IBRD is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and then IDA is the International Development Association. IBRD and IDA work together, and together they provide finance to governments and provide risk mitigation instruments. So the third organization is MEGA, that's the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. MEGA provides political risk insurance and provide also credit enhancement for investors looking for opportunities in frontier markets. So if you look at what we do in terms of climate-related finance, we have a mandate from our management to focus almost exclusively on growing our climate finance work. From fiscal year 2015 to fiscal year 2018, we doubled the amount of the climate-related finance that we provide to government and investors. And these are broken down by IBRD, IDA, IFC, and MEGA. And as it stands for this fiscal year, the climate-related finance represents about 1/3 of our portfolio. The way we do that, we have an objective of not just going through from about $20 billion financing a year. We want to double that or even go to $50 billion a year in finance. And the way to do that is to look at all projects, large and small, and find ways to help those projects. One initiative is the Scaling Solar Initiatives, which is a World Bank initiative aimed at helping investors overcome some of the risk of financing a hybrid project in developing countries. And it's a package of de-risking the project where they simplify the BD requirement, where they provide template, they provide competitive financing, where they provide risk mitigation and credit enhancement to allow investors to move forward with financing in these countries. A recent example is Senegal, where a 60 megawatt solar plant received bids of about 3.8 cents per kilowatt hour. We have also a similar project in Zambia, where also, because of the involvement and the use of this de-risking instrument, the World Bank was able to, the World Bank participation was able to attract the lowest tariff registered in the region at that time. We are not just involved in solar and energy, we are also very big in mining. In fact, we are big in all the sectors. We are involved in about 70 countries that are mining countries around the world. Our investment every year in terms of support of mining is anywhere between $1 billion to $1.5 billion. One stellar year was in 2016 when we supported the Bulyan Hulu, when we supported the Oyu Tolgoi copper project, which is the largest known copper project at the time, requiring investment of over $4 billion. And because of the involvement of the World Bank Group, where IFC provided a loan facility of $1.2 billion, and MEGA issued guarantees of $1 billion, that project, which has been in the book for years, for as long as I remember, was able to finally get finance and get off. So we are involved in mining, but we involve also in large-scale power development. And one example of that is in Egypt, where we financed the largest solar park in the world. And there also, the World Bank, through IFC and MEGA, were involved in order to facilitate or in order to catalyze investment or involvement from other players such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Proparco, and other key players. So these are ways that we can really participate in mitigating some of the risk. This fiscal year, which ended for us in June 30, 2018, was really a record year in terms of our involvement in climate finance. As I said earlier, about over $20 billion mobilized, about 1/3 of our portfolio, we supported generating or integrating 18 gigawatt of additional renewable energy into the electricity grid, mobilizing over $10 billion in commercial finance for clean energy, investing nearly $800 million in improving climate resilient transport system, and supporting $7.7 billion in adaptation investment. Another initiative, flagship initiative for this year is realizing that just pushing solar or wind or renewable is not the solution, the sustainable solution. There was an alternative for accelerating battery storage for development. And the bank dedicated $1 billion in funding for that initiatives. And we expect that $1 billion to mobilize an additional $4 billion from other key donors and players so that we can support this segment and make solar or wind or renewable energy more sustainable. To bring this all together, as you see, we are very involved in mining, we are very involved in energy, but really Africa provided the ground, the opportunity for us to bring the two together in terms of developing hybrid. Africa is one continent that is a paradox in the sense that it's sitting on a huge amount of energy resources, but it is energy poor. Most of these resources remain undeveloped because of regulatory, political, institutional risk. So we started the Power of the Mind initiatives, and the concept is to leverage the extractive industries' investment to boost energy. Because when you look for frontier markets, like in Africa, when you talk about a mining project, in reality you talk about an infrastructure project. When you come, you have to build a port, you have to build the railway, you have to build the power plants, and you have to build the mine. And usually the mine is only about a fraction. So about 50 to 60% of the investment is infrastructure related. And a good chunk of that will go to power. So realizing that, and realizing that Africa has a lot of minerals, and that mining companies in Africa and in most environments like this are looking for power solutions to operate competitively. So we support it. We propose the Power of the Mine initiatives to bring mining sector investors, power producers, IPPs, governments, so that we can work out power solution that can work, not just for the mining companies, but also for the community. Because remember, the objectives of the World Bank is to reduce poverty, to support growth that is sustainable. And so in order to do that, you have to have energy that is sustainable. So we think that the Power of the Mine will offer that. We look at several options for hybrids between self-supply and grid supply. We see a lot of intermediate opportunities from our survey during the conduct of the Power of the Mine study, where we can support either companies interested in supplying themselves, but also supplying the community some electricity. That's the low-hanging fruit, where a company can contribute to improving its social license to operate by using part of its power to electrify the surrounding communities. We have also companies pooling their resources together to invest in the grid. We have also companies supplying to the grid that is producing and supplying excess power to the grid. And so we have all these options which encourage the World Bank we have a lot of roundtable discussions with companies, with mining companies and power producers, which say that yes, this will work as a solution because it has two objectives. First, it helps the mining company become more competitive. But secondly, it also improves energy access for the poor. Because in an energy-starved country or continent, multiplying these power production capacities is the way to address some of the energy concerns. So the key goal, of course, is, as I said, our objective is to reduce poverty. We're using power as a way to reduce poverty. So renewable energy for us is a way to reduce poverty. So we're primarily interested in improving energy access for the poor. Our secondary concern is to help make mining a competitive industry in the countries where they operate. And so the Power of the Mine initiative hopes to achieve this objective by bringing government and industry together. But the World Bank is playing a role also in making that possible, because it contributes to the clean energy objective that we are pushing, but also it will help us make some of our energy investment or energy support more effective. For instance, when we line transmission line through mining centers, that will make it easier for mining companies to consider renewable energy and selling the excess energy to the grid or tying themselves to the main grid. One opportunity that arose for the implementation of the operationalization of the Power of the Mine is in Mali. Mali is a poor country, one of the poorest countries in the world, but also it's one of the major gold producers in Africa. It's third after South Africa and Ghana. Mali is the third producer of gold. In Western Mali, there's an abundance of gold deposits and gold mines, particularly at the border between Mali and Senegal. So one of the leaders in Mali operation is a company that has made its mark in Africa. It's Randgold. So Randgold is one of the flagship operations of Randgold is in Mali, but Randgold is facing increasing energy costs. Most of its energy is thermal energy, and so it's coming at high cost because Mali is a landlocked country, so driving all that energy to the remote areas in Mali and giving the fluctuation also of energy prices, so it affects the competitiveness of the company. So we looked at with the company an opportunity for implementing the Power of the Mine pilot in this area where there's a cluster of mines in western Senegal, where we have Endeavour operating, we have Randgold operating, and further up there's IAMGOLD. So there are a number of international companies operating in the area. So our idea was to convince these companies to pool their resources together so that we can consider building a hybrid that with some mini grids that will serve the needs, the electricity needs of these companies and reduce substantially the operating costs. Well, that was the initial discussion, but we are still in that discussion because it's not easy to bring the different companies' plans together. So while we were in those discussions, Randgold decided to move on its own to start the bidding process for the first hybrid power project, mine hybrid power project in Mali for about 24 megawatt. And with substantial savings, so it's expecting in terms of saving for almost $7 million in saving. A number of liters of fuel that could be saved on that, but also contribution to climate change. And so we are very excited about this opportunity, which is moving forward. And so the World Bank looks at the benefits, and the benefits fits very well the role that we have set ourselves in terms of reducing poverty, because one of the major benefits here is the social license to operate, is that Randgold is thinking already about mine closure. After mine closure, what kind of power would the community have? But Randgold is also thinking about sharing with the community some of its power, because in Mali, as the saying goes, is that gold does not shine for all the Malian, in the sense that it's shining only for mining companies. So there's a lot of resentment about villages around mines not having electricity, not having infrastructure. So one way to resolve that is these initiatives where we can take the project of Randgold and then have our own project, our own funding for tying up to Randgold project. So one way we could contribute was to look at this small project and see how to make it scalable. And to make it scalable, we can undertake studies and look at the scalability of the project, talk with different companies operating, particularly in Western Mali, and see how we can work with these companies to work together so that we can have one scalable PV power plant that can address the need and at the same time supply the surrounding communities. Another way we are looking at it is to tie the project with rural electrification. We have already financed $40 million, over $40 million to Mali to develop rural electrification. And since most of the mines are in rural areas, so one way is to use some funding from that project to subsidize the densification of the grid, of the mini-grid, so that the mini-grid can supply the surrounding communities. So we are in discussion with Randgold about that social responsibility aspect of taking the power plant, the 20 megawatt power plant, and tying it to some mini-grid, some transmission line, and then having it financed through this World Bank Finance project, which is government funded. So this way the government can work with Randgold in the sense of extending the grid to households and making it available to local communities. The other area where the World Bank is involved is that in countries where the government is poor, where the fiscal arrangements are very skittish, the sustainability is an issue. So mining companies are saying we have a gold mine, which is 8, maybe 10 years. So we build a PV power plant, but after the mine, so what next? So we are looking at working with the government to address some of the regulatory barriers which prevent an IPP or a power producer from selling to the grid. But also we are talking about aligning the transmission line so that there's an opportunity after the mine or even during the mine if there's an excess capacity, so that excess capacity can be sold to the transmission line. But there's also an effort to remove the regulatory barriers to IPPs because it's very difficult. Utilities do not want to compete with IPPs, and so the problem of selling the power, producing and selling the power needs to be resolved through regulatory mechanism. We are also looking at the pricing issues and advising the government of these issues. This is one significant advantage of the World Bank, is that we work on the policy side to remove some of the barriers to financing, and we work directly on the risk mitigations, the de-risking side, to provide political risk insurance, provide guarantees, provide loans and equity through our colleague from IFC, so that we make the investment possible, even where it was when it was not possible without the involvement of the World Bank. The challenge we're facing is still the challenge of scalability, that is moving up to scale. And so this is an example of Randgold, where if you go from 20 megawatt to 40 megawatt, significant saving. Randgold is right now facing 15 cents to 17 cents per kilowatt hour, but with this type of initiative, it can bring that cost to under 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is why we invest in companies, players and IPPs and others who are here if you are considering project in the developing countries, the World Bank may be your partner to address these risks and make it possible. Thank you very much.